Hello.
Morning. Good
Hi,
morning.
how are you?
Baruch Hashem. Oh, no football today, Neville.
I've got to admit, it's true. I'm injured.
What's going on, Neville?
So
What have you
I need
done?
more. I need spiritual, fitness, spiritual fitness. So,
Very good. What have you done to yourself?
well, I've just, groin strains and stuff like that. Just old man stuff. Old man trying to be young man, playing football. The usual thing. I only know how to play one way. But been to shul, back to shul last few weeks.
They're still wearing masks and all, right?
Yeah. They even wear masks in Shacharis when there's only like 14 of them in Holy Law, which seems a bit, it's a massive place, but that's their policy. So
Protocol, policy is just the way they do it, I guess.
how's the family?
Baruch Hashem. Yeah, no, it's almost
Sleeping
6.
okay? Sleeping okay?
What do we say? We sleep loads of times every night. It's very special. It's the big mitzvah. It's just strenuous. It's not easy.
Of course, it's not. No. But
how's everyone at your end? How's Jamie?
Yeah, he's doing well. Starting to get excited. Starting to have plans for the wedding. We're planning to go on holiday near the end of June with Jamie and all the family and Machatonim as well. They're coming with.
Is that going ahead?
Yeah. We're going away.
Beautiful.
So we'll get together with all of them. Be nice. Yeah.
They're
similar ages to us as well. So.
Really?
Been married around same length of time, so it's all very similar.
Brilliant! You'll have a great time. You'll have a great time.
It'd be good.
The Shem's up.
How's Shana? Okay.
Yes, she's working overtime, but she's doing very well. Baruch Hashem. Yeah. I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to get started now, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, and then if anyone jumps in the middle, we'll go along with that. Just do the share.
One question.
Please.
Length of time, so they're all very similar.
Brilliant. You'll have a great time. You'll have a great time. One second.
How's Shana?
Here we go.
Was that being recorded?
No, it's the YouTube. It's playing back, and because I record it on YouTube, and then I store it there.
A question about colors.
Color.
Well, obviously, with the Yossi was reminding us yesterday about two colors, two knots of 6, 12 tribes, and all that. Vav, each one is etc. But if there's only 2 of you, 2 large colors is a lot to eat, and it's a bit of a waste, and one's not keen to eat too much bread, and so sometimes one would like just knots rather than full colors. Are we is it not a proper bracha if you're only if you don't have two large 6 knots each colors?
The 6 knot each is got great sources in holy books, but it's not mandatory. It's not halakha.
Okay.
So mystically, there's tremendous importance to it. That Riza would be very proud of you if you did it. But I think to have 2 loaves of challah, that's the halakha.
Yeah, exactly. So
So you have 2 small loaves, it's still 2 loaves.
Yeah,
and they should also both be complete. So rather than take 1 and split it in half, you have 2 knots. Then you're ahead of your game.
Yeah, exactly. The same. Yeah, same.
Yeah. Well said.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So make it work. One second. Okay. Our journey for Parshah here. We do the first thing is what's going on in the Jewish calendar. It happens to be that today is a very special day. How would you believe it? But it's relatively a normal week. Normal meaning that it's smooth sailing. We have today a special day. It's the 12th day of the month of Sivan, and that is the 12th day is the last and final day of what's called the Dmei Tashlumin, days to catch up. What are we catching up for? In the times of the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple times, everybody would go to the Beis Hamikdash, travel up to Yerushalayim 3 times a year, the Shalosh Regalim, the 3-foot festivals. And part of coming up to Yerushalayim included also, you have to bring offerings to Hashem. You don't come empty-handed. We don't come empty-handed, so we're offering offerings to Hashem. Now, when it's Sukkot or it's Pesach, you have the intermediary days in which one can bring all the karbanis. But Shavuos is a one-day festival, and it's a Yom Tov. Unless you need a meat, you cannot be shechting an animal or slaughtering an animal on the Yom Tov day. And therefore, after Yom Tov finish, they would all bring those extra bonus offerings that they brought with them. The ones which were obligation, mandatory ones. And then there was more people would come. They would come to Shalayim and they would get together with family and friends. And they would eat a carbon shlamim together. Come, let's bring a thanks to Hashem. And let's have a barbecue, everyone. And Yerushalayim was full. It was like the business of having lambs and goats and animals that could be used for carbon was big. And then there was, of course, those major parties going on. People got together. Of course, you had to be careful because it was a carbon. You had to eat it in the right frame of mind and the right preparation. But that's what it was like following a Yom Tov. So after Shavuos, there were 7 days in which one could continue to bring that mandatory carbon riyah, that carbon offering of eating. And that last day was the 12th day of Shavuos, which is today. Why is it significant to us? Because, of course, back in the day, it was mainly the offering. But to us today, anything you might have missed out on the inspiration and the motivation Shavuos can bring, today is another day that you can, a hand up. Go ahead, Neville, please. Love it.
So obviously I've heard this before about everyone coming to Jerusalem, sacrifices, etc. Are they all sacrificing in the temple? Or are they sacrificing in the vicinity?
So all in the temple. From when the Beis Hamikdash was built, so once we moved to Jerusalem, which was even earlier, once there was a Mishkan, it was forbidden to bring an offering outside of. Once there was Yerushalayim, the only place you could have a temple is in Yerushalayim. So the short answer.
But how many people are we talking? Because people have said in the past there's millions or whatever. I mean, logistically, how could they all get in and out of the temple, do the sacrifice, and go?
So your question's a great question, and a big part of the answer is logistics. It was a big deal. The Kohanim had to spend a lot of effort in making sure that logistics were smooth. But your question's even stronger when we're going to talk about today the Carbon Pesach. Because the Carbon Pesach had only a very short window of time in which every single person had to be involved in an offering. And that was really intense. That was probably the most intense stretch that the Kohen had to do. And every Kohen was on call. It was a full-on operation. And the Mishnah describes, it tries to emphasize how smooth and how efficient they had to be, where they had like human chains of passing the cups of blood going to the altar. They were literally doing this. Take pass, take pass, take pass, take pass. And the cups of blood had to be brought all the way to the base, to the Mizbeach, to the altar, sprinkled on the altar, and made sure that it doesn't spill before it gets there. So I had to travel along, get to the altar, sprinkle it, and then pass the cup back to someone else to use. And there was constant flow. That's how busy it was. But even though it was so busy, the Kohanim made a major effort and it worked. So that answers the question. Okay? So that's special about today. In the Hasidic terminology, it's an energy boost. It's the Yemei Tashlum days of making up things, similar to we had Pesach Sheni, which we'll talk about as well. Second chances. The idea of having after Shavuos a second chance to still make up for it is a great idea. It's an idea that Yiddishkeit makes a big deal out of. One more thing, it's happening today. It's not necessarily on the Jewish calendar, but it is happening today, and it's a big deal. There is an international competition for Jewish boys and girls to study the book of Sefer HaMitzvos, the Rambam's book of mitzvahs. And they, over 5 years, learn all the mitzvahs. It starts off from year 5, roughly, and it goes all the way through till year 10. And the boys and girls every year learn another fifth of the one of the 5 books, the way it's split up in the Rambam, and they get tested. So today is the Chidon Sefer Mitzvahs award ceremony. If you're looking for some fantastic entertainment this evening, I think it's 6:45 British time, and that is at the Chidon, Chidon, thechidon.com. It's really interesting. full-on competition and award ceremony where they have first on the buzzer and they have like who gets the most questions, and it's really intense, and they really make a very nice program out of it. And there are thousands of boys and girls around the world who worked very hard. Personally, 3 of my children are in it, and Mendel's on stage. It's all virtual this year, but he's virtually on stage, so it's exciting. And it's a special time where Jewish children are enjoying and having fun doing good things, learning more. Sorry? 5:45. Correction, it's 5:45.
Yeah.
Here we are. Thank you, Chaim Mishka. Okay, so we're moving right along. It's Parshas Bahalosecha, and Parshas Bahalosecha loaded Parsha. We are going to be talking about the balance between being the best self you could be, and at the same time also being part of the community, the collective. And we're going to talk a little about how Yiddishkeit describes that balance. It's something we've spoken about before, but it's also important to rehash it and relook at it. It's a great question that comes up in multiple different opportunities. But the idea of being able to make sure that you don't lose yourself on behalf of the community, but at the same time, you're gaining out of being part of the community. That sort of idea is very important. Good morning. Good morning, Jeff. Come right aboard.
Yeah. Morning, Robert. I'm going to be very short with you today because I'm going to have to go to my brother-in-law's coming around shortly. So I'll stay as long as I can. All right.
Happy mitzvahs all the time. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Pleasure to see you. So we're talking Parshas Bahalosecha, the rundown of the Parsha very briefly. Starting the Parsha talks about Aaron commanding to raise the light. It follows on from last week's Parsha, in which each of the 12 tribes, besides for the tribe of Levi, were bringing inauguration offerings. They were bringing the Chanukas Mizbeach. And the only tribe that didn't was the tribe of Levi. And Aaron, who was the leader, was the only leader that didn't bring any gift. And he was feeling like he's missing out on a mitzvah. And Hashem says to Aaron, no, you're not missing out. You are going to bring a daily gift. Your daily gift will be that you will light the menorah every single day and bring light into the world. Tribe of Levi was also initiated in the service of the Beis Hamikdash. There was literally a whole full-on ceremony in order to be able to make sure that Leviim were in the right position. And from there, we go right into the story of the first anniversary of leaving Mitzrayim. So we left Mitzrayim, we left Egypt in the month of Nisan, the 15th of Nisan, in the year that they left. And then that... 2448, and then the next year, first year after that, they already had the Torah. They were still at Mount Sinai. They were still hadn't traveled. They'd already built a Mishkan, a home for Hashem. They'd also had the golden calf in between. But at this point, they're now having the first time to celebrate the anniversary of Pesach. So it was the second Passover in history. And at that time, Hashem reminds the people it's time to bring the Pesach offering, which is, of course, in ideal world, the highlight, the centerpiece of the whole Seder night. Or of course, we still do a Seder even though we don't have it yet, but in an ideal world, that would and still should be the centerpiece of the Seder night. There were, at the time, reminders. It was slightly different the way they did it the second year. And of course, by this time, they have a Mishkan, they have a home, there's an address where they can go visit Hashem. They have to bring the offerings at that address, as we mentioned earlier. They couldn't bring it on the house, it had to be offered there. And the whole procedure is how it works. At the time, there were people who were impure. They were being busy doing good things, looking after those who had passed away. And they were caught out because they were not able to bring the Pesach. It was the first time it happened. It was the first time that they had rules of how you can and cannot bring an offering. Up until the giving of the Torah, you want to bring an offering to Hashem, just do it. In your backyard, wherever you want. Like Avraham Avinu, wherever he decided to thank Hashem, he pitched up an altar and brought an offering to Hashem. But now they have a Torah. Now it's different. Now there's rules. They have a Mishkan. It can only be brought in that address. They have to be pure. And they came to Moshe and they said the same sort of idea. We feel like we're missing out on a mitzvah. We're doing good things. Why should we miss out? Mitzvahs means connection. Mitzvahs mean you're close to Hashem. Why should we miss out? And that's when Hashem created a new mitzvah. And that was the secondary Pesach, which we celebrated not so long ago, about a month ago. The Parsha continues to talk about the travels of the Jewish people, where they came, where they went, and how they were, formation of how they would set up and how they were when they camped, and also how they traveled. And we have the sad part of the Parsha. Interesting, this is where in the Parsha there's an upside down nun in the Torah. There's a letter written upside down, 2 letters, and it's one before and after where it says "V'hibin soya Aaron," that the Aaron traveled. That famous quote that we sing when the Aaron is open. The upside down nun is to emphasize that although there are non-complementary ideas that are mentioned about the Jewish people in this week's Parsha. Still, Hashem loves the people, and Hashem traveled with the people. What were the non-complementary ideas? First of all, when they left Sinai after being there for a year, they rushed. They were quite happy to leave, which wasn't a great position to be in. They'd been there for almost a year, and a lot had happened, and they were happy to move along, but it was the place that Hashem had revealed himself to them. But also, right after that, they had the story when the complainers started complaining that manna from heaven is boring. Where's the meat? We need some flesh. And Hashem wasn't very happy. And he told them, don't worry, I'm going to give you meat. But at that time, Moshe Rabbeinu complained that it's too much for him to handle everybody on their own. There's so much complaining going on. Everyone's got another tzaras. And that's when Hashem established 70 elders who would assist Moshe Rabbeinu. And each one of them started to prophesize in the encampment, different things. And there was 12 tribes. 70 divided by 12 for our mathematicians. 70 divided by 12 doesn't work. You need 72 to divide it by 12, and that would be 2 per each of the tribes. So there was 72. Each tribe presented 2, and 2 of the 72 were not nominated because there were only supposed to be 70 elders. Amazingly, those spare 2 were Eldad and Medad. And as all the other elders who were nominated went out to do what they were doing, those 2 started to prophesize. And the people couldn't believe what was going on. They clearly were great, righteous people. And they started to talk about what's going to be in the future, that we will go into Israel, but we will go with a different leader. And they started talking about that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't going to go in. Don't forget, this is 39 years before it's supposed to play itself out. And people were shocked. Even Yeshua, Moshe Rabbeinu's right-hand man, says to Moshe, you're going to let them be like that? How can you let them? And Moshe Rabbeinu says, what do you mean? If only every Jewish person, if only everyone would be able to rise to this level of being a prophet, leave them. Later on, the Parshah describes how Miriam, Moshe Rabbeinu's sister, spoke about her brother. And although she was extremely righteous and had no bad intention, it was Lashon Hara. And because it was Lashon Hara, she immediately was surprisingly struck with Tzara'as, and she had to stay out the camp. And she was staying out in the camp, and Moshe Rabbeinu davened her b'yav, and the entire Jewish people waited for her to heal before they traveled along. And that's how the parsha ends, how Miriam was rewarded for the time she spent waiting for Moshe when he was a baby, that the entire community waited for her. When did she wait? When he was a baby, when he was put into the river Nile. Okay, so that's the parsha in a nutshell. Interesting, one of the recurring themes in this week's parsha is that when there's an opportunity to do a mitzvah, you don't want to miss out. Interestingly, equally, also there are times that we see that when a person's involved in doing one thing, they have to be fully involved. One of the amazing things in this week's parsha, one of the beautiful lessons, just as a quick tidbit, is that when the Jewish people went and traveled, every time they set up camp, they built up the entire Mishkan, which was a big operation. The thing is that sometimes they stepped, says the Apostle, they stayed in one place only overnight, and then they would immediately travel on. Yet they still set up the entire Mishkan. It was a big, massive operation with wood and with drapes and bringing all the vessels in and uncovering it and setting up pegs, and it was a massive deal. But they still did it every time. And then when they'd leave, they would pack it all up again. So sometimes they stopped in a place and it was for years. Sometimes it was a very short period of time. And one of the important lessons are that whatever we do, we have to do it completely. And if it's worth doing, it's worth doing it all the way. So there's some beautiful stories that illustrate this idea. But if it's something that needs to be done, doing it and can't wait for it to be finished isn't a very Jewish way of doing things. Whatever we need to be doing, even if it's, let's say, you need to be eating lunch in order to have strength to be able to focus on what you're doing. But if right now this is what you're doing, we have to do it fully. In today's day and age, when people are constantly checking and looking over the shoulders, checking your phone, checking your messages whilst you're doing 15 other things, the Torah has a better way of doing things. Each thing that we do fully. There's a quick short story, a bit of a joke, but they say in the Haim, there was a very wealthy Yid who was a shtickle miserly. He wasn't so happy to share his wealth. And when poor people used to come and knock on his door, he had a hard time giving tzedakah. So what he would say to them is, come and sit and have a dinner with me. And as they were sitting having dinner, so he couldn't bear the thought of someone else eating his food that he had worked hard for. So he would sit them down, and as they were about to start eating, he would ask them questions. And whilst they were answering the questions, he would quickly eat. And by the time they finished answering the question, he either asked another question or it was already time to clear the course. And effectively, he made sure that no one had time to eat. That's how he would do it. Now, word got out that this guy he's a hard person to get anything out of. So there was one clever pauper who said, you know what, I'll show him how it works. He comes, knocks on his door, he gets himself invited for dinner. And as soon as the food hits the table, he digs in. He starts eating. It's the soup. He's eating. And of course, the mice is looking, how this guy's eating my food? I can't take it. He starts asking him, oh, so where you from? He says, oh, I'm from Brody. And he's eating as fast as he can. He's shoving it down his mouth. So he says, oh, how's Chaim Yankel? I let him, he lives in Brody. He's the butcher, right? I lent him money once. The guy looks up for a second. He says he's dead. And he keeps on eating. The guy's like, what? Chaim Yankel's dead? He owes me money. How can this be? What's so sad? What about Shmerel Beryl? For 1 second, he looks up. He's dead. The meantime, he's already sticking in the chicken. And every person who he asks about, everything he says, dead. The guy's almost finished the meal, and the real wealthy yid is looking at himself. What's going on? How come everyone said? He says to this poor guy, what happened in Brody? Was there an epidemic? Was there a terrible disease? He says, no. While I'm eating, everybody's dead. And he finishes eating. What's the message? The message that sometimes you could do that in a positive way. Not dead, literally, but right now, whilst I'm busy studying Torah, whilst I'm busy when I was spending time with my family, whilst I'm busy doing whatever it is that's important to be done, everything else is on hold. When everything else is on hold, we do it fully. And that was true even when they settled in a tent, camping in the desert. That sort of message comes across. And then when we manage to do that, we're lending importance to every part of life. That's another beautiful idea that we learned from the Parsha. But today I want to focus on a larger, perhaps more important area, and that's the area that we would discuss at the beginning when we're talking about individual as part of the collective, how we walk the balance. What does Yiddishkeit have to say about divisions in the context of the broader community? We teach our children that they are very important. We teach our children that each one of them have their own skill set, and that what they have and they can bring to the table is unique. Not only that, in today's society, that's how, if we don't do it, we're missing out. It's so important for us to teach our children this important thing, and we tell ourselves the same thing. Don't just be towing the line, schlepper. Stand up for yourself. Asher, you want to say something?
No.
Oh, it's good to hear your voice, though.
Good luck.
Good luck. What we're going to discuss today is if Yiddishkeit has the same ideal. Just Jewish teachings believe that everybody has to do their own bit, because if you open up the Shulchan Aruch, if you open up the Jewish Code of Law, if you check with your rabbi, you might find that actually there is an enormous importance on doing the same thing. Everyone has to do a mitzvah, and everyone has to do the same way, and everyone has to make Shabbos, and everyone has to have Kiddush, and everyone has to. Where's the uniqueness? Where's the individuality in Yiddishkeit? More importantly, you speak to some people, they feel like organized religion in general has this problem. Organized religion basically means do what everyone else is doing, carry the same cards, wave the same flag, do the same rituals that everyone else is doing, and therefore your own individuality is on hold almost. And Yiddishkeit seems to toe that line, and it goes along that way. But of course, Chassidus is going to tell us that although our communal aspects, our religious aspects, our ritual aspects are very much there, through that, we actually walk away with a stronger individuality, not a forgone or weakened or given up on our individuality. And so finding that balance is always something that we should remind ourselves, because if we don't, we can lose out on both sides. Either we lose the communal aspect or we lose the individual aspect. Before we start,
Rabbi, it's a good question there, because to be an individual, and I'm being careful how I put this.
Go ahead.
In the secular community, a lot of us are individuals.
Yes.
Right, very much so. The way we dress, the things we do. I mean, there is a commonality within the Judaism to be able to keep the code, the laws. But it's you know yourself that there is, and I always if I go into quite a from shul, I will wear a coloured shirt just to be individual. So, I'm not being disrespectful. I'm just going, well, what am I doing wrong? I'm being myself. I'm being Jeff Riley. I'm not being somebody else. I don't have to be. I'm not frightened of, it's like going to work. My boss wants us to wear a suit, so I go in there with just a casual dress and, to work because I feel more comfortable. And, as long as you are doing things in a respectful manner and you're not breaking the law, because there's nowhere written in the Gemara, in the Kodesh, in the oral written law about how we dress, as long as it's not immoral. There's nothing there says you can't go in. So I put it back in your court, Rolf. It's an interesting question.
I'm going to ask the other question, though. It's a good question. I'm going to get back to it. But first, is there an advantage to emphasizing the community?
Yes, there is. To be proud about it, yes.
Okay, so we're looking for what if somebody doesn't belong to a community as such, what are they missing out on? Or those of us who are in a community who do feel very much that we uphold the community, what do we gain?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I don't want to take away the lecture, but you go into your personal, your own psyche, your own way. Forget about the community. It's how you feel inside as a person. I've seen it from both sides. I've been there. I had the T-shirt years ago, and now I've decided to be within reason. If we're going to a wedding somewhere and they say dress code is dinner suit for men, my wife would want me to wear a dinner suit. But it's just an interesting question. I'm not saying it's wrong or right. I'm just saying try to be an individual. Be an individual.
Neville, what are you going to say?
It's a nice idea to always be an individual, but as part of a society and part of a community, there are minhags and cultural pressures and norms, and a lot of these norms are man-made and only been created in the last 100 years. But we are influenced by society. We go to shul, we wear a suit, we wear a tie. Unless we go to Israel, then no jacket, no tie, flip-flops. And so because people go to Israel and dress differently, then they start coming back to Manchester and start dressing similar. Yeah. Because English is very traditional and there's a certain United Synagogue way of doing things. But being part of a community is amazing. And it's all to do with the friendships you create, and people who aren't members of a community, it's actually very sad because they limit their scope for meeting people.
So meeting people is a very good angle.
Being part of a wider community rather than everyone's got their own network of people they know from privately, business, or whatever. But being part of a local community increases that and also creates friendships and feeling of belonging and all that.
Feeling of belonging, friendships, and we can maybe even add on to that support. When a person needs support, it's not like you have friends you can ask from. It's almost like a default assumption that if someone in the community needs support, this is what we do as a community. We support each other. So rather than it being a whole new ask, it's almost taken for granted that if a person gets stuck, there will be support within the community. And that in itself is also a tremendous bonus. But I think the social aspect of just having a sense of belonging is maybe even more powerful than the support, because it's not something specific, but it's a general approach to everything in life. You're not on your own. And that sort of sense of not being on your own, the question is, how worth it is it? How much is it worth sacrificing individuality for the sake of communal? Now, it's not really a simple answer to answer. And what we're going to learn today isn't how to separate it. What we are going to learn, though, or at least we'll try and discuss, is how to harmonize it, how to make sure that each one complements the other. And the end, I think there's a text from the late Rabbi Sachs Shalom, in which he describes Yiddishkeit's angle. I think he quotes even a non-Jewish scholar. The Yiddishkeit's ability to walk a very fine balance. But it is a fine balance. And when we're able to do it, be able to remain individual, like Jeff was saying, come to shul, whichever shirt you decided is you. But come to shul. What are you doing in shul? You're wearing your shirt in shul because shul is communal. But then you're wearing your own shirt. And how does that work from a Torah perspective? Actually, it's highly and strongly encouraged, not only in how we dress, but also importantly, how we express and how we productively grow in life. And that sort of balance, how we view ourselves, how we view ourselves in relation to others, these are things that in this week's Parshah gives us a very strong measure, like a guiding light, that as Hashem will be able to help us even when there are things that are in the gray area. Which area of the Parshah we just go ahead?
Interesting enough, correct what you said, absolutely, and that was spot on, absolutely spot on, about the community. But it's funny, in the digress, it's like back in the old days in the community, in the second community, people in the executive box used to wear top hats. They used to wear top hats, and it was very formal. And you came to shul in a lot of our schools in Manchester and probably Europe, you had to dress up. You had to come in a suit for the men, and women had to dress up very smartly dressed, and you were frowned upon if you didn't come looking, and the children, the bochers had to look. Today is because of Israel. Israel has changed a lot of things. You go into Israel, you're in the Tanya there, and you're walking in. Man, you're saying that. When I was in the States, I went to shul. I went into a state in New York, in a very sponsored shul in New York. I dressed I didn't wear a suit on, but I dressed very formally. I knew it would be, necessary to do that. But so you're right. Neville's right. We're part of a structure there, and we must keep into that. But the individuality does come into it. But the halacha says we don't have to, as long as it's not immoral. Right. So I said my bit on that one. Thank you very much.
Neville, you want to say something else?
Well, I've been campaigning to get rid of executive boxes for 15 years. It should be gone. It should be gone. It's the last remnants of an old idea. Should be gone.
I do want to tell you that having people sit in front of the base of the bima, whether it's the executive or something else, but having rows of seats that go ahead of the bima. The truth is, in most shuls, you have the sides go ahead, but having the seats in front of the bima was considered a very important part of the Orthodox shul in order to emphasize the difference between other sorts of houses of prayer, to make sure that the bima is.
Since COVID's come in, I managed to locate a seat right next to the Mizrach. So I said to the president, I said, right, I want to come out of that one. Can I take the seat? He said, well, that one's, you can take the one. I've waited like 25 years. And if my late father was alive to see it, I actually sat right near the Mizrach. It was such, so I felt so honored to actually have, but that was just by default because they put me there because when we had to be social distance, I actually got a seat literally right next to the ark. I couldn't have a better position. It was it was, some people got their seats there because they've been members for years and through their like parents and stuff like that. But but what Neville said, we've been trying to do that for years to stop that, to get the executive, let them sit with everybody else, and that's it. A lot do. They don't want to sit in the top in the front box, so they don't want it. But it's part of the minhag of the shuls, and that's it.
Okay, we're going to look at some psukim in the parsha that describe the story of that second Pesach offering. So it's the first anniversary of the Korban Pesach, and here's the pasuk that says it right here in this week's parsha. Hashem spoke to Moshe in the Sinai desert in the second year of the Exodus from the land of Egypt in the first month, saying, first month meaning the month of Nisan. Children of Israel shall make the Passover sacrifice in its appointed time. It's the first time they have an anniversary, and they have to do the same Korban Pesach they did last year. Now, you got to remember, the first time they did it, they were still in Egypt. It was the night of the Exodus. In other words, that was the night of the death of the firstborn, and they're only leaving the next day. So they were still stuck in Mitzrayim, and things were very different. But here on the second year, they're now in the desert, and everyone has to make the Passover sacrifice on the afternoon of the 14th of this month. You shall make it in its appointed time. In accordance with all the statutes and all its ordinances, you shall make it. Moshe spoke to the children of Israel, instructing them to make the Passover sacrifice. So they made the Passover sacrifice in the first month, on the afternoon of the 14th day of the month of Sinai, according to all that God had commanded Moshe. so did the children of Israel do. They had a lot of rules they had to follow, and they had to follow it very specifically, which included bringing the offering to the Mishkan, making sure that they prepared themselves in groups, that there'd be nothing left over, making sure that they weren't going to break any of the bones, and the whole entire animal had to stay complete. And of course, they had to stay within their groups, within their bubbles, if you like, for modern terminology, in order to eat it properly. Now, when did they have to bring it? Where's it gone? Here, the children of Israel shall make the Passover sacrifice in its appointed time. And here, Rashi quotes Chachamim, who ask, what's this appointed time that the Torah is referring to? What is the message? What is the Torah trying to tell us? That they made it, but they didn't just make it, they did it in its appointed time. Says Rashi, that year actually turned out that the 14th of Nisan, which is the day you're supposed to bring the offering, was Shabbos. So Erev Pesach was Shabbos, just like we had this year. We had Erev Shabbos. Shabbos was Erev Pesach. We ended up flushing our crumbs down the toilet and eating Shabbos meal really early, so before the time. That year they also had Shabbos was Erev Pesach. Now, when you just have to eat bread before it comes time, there's not that many questions that arise in complications. But if you have to slaughter an animal and sprinkle its blood, well, Shabbos, one of the things you cannot do is slaughter an animal unless it's a mitzvah. And therefore the question is, which one shall they keep? Shabbos or Korban Pesach? Should they make sure not to kill an animal on Shabbos? Or should they make sure to keep the Korban Pesach mitzvah by slaughtering the animal? And here, Rashi points out that when Hashem says to them, keep it, the Korban Pesach, in its appointed time, you shall make it in its appointed time, even if it's to fulfill on Shabbos is the message. That when Shabbos is Erev Pesach, one does slaughter the Korban Pesach and bring in an offering. The truth is that this wasn't the only korban that was brought on Shabbos. There were many times that Shabbos, you're not allowed to slaughter an animal, but they did in the Beis HaMikdash. The truth is, every Shabbos, there are Shabbos offerings. There was the daily offerings that were brought on Shabbos in the morning and the afternoon, which corresponds to Shacharis and Mincha. But actually on Shabbos, we have a whole new extra davening called Musaf. What's Musaf all about? That in the Beis HaMikdash on Shabbos, there were special korbanos that had to be brought only and specifically on Shabbos. They're called the additional offerings, the Musaf offerings. And commemorating that, we'd have a Musaf. So every Shabbos, they were bringing offerings, even though it's Shabbos, but because it's in its designated time, they would bring it on Shabbos. So the same is true with the Korban Pesach. Now, the truth is, historically, this did not happen very often. Nowadays, we have a calendar, and therefore it's calculated on a system, and it works out that very often, not that very often, we have every few years, we have a Shabbos Erev Pesach. Back in the day, it turns out when at times where they were calculated according to the moon, it wasn't that common. So much so that the Gemara this in Pesachim describes the Sefta, but it's brought down that there was a time that it was so uncommon, people forgot the halacha. And the leadership at the time were the Bnei Beseira, and the Bnei Beseira, who were then the leaders, were under the impression that Korban Pesach should not be brought on Shabbos. Here's the quote. One year, the 14th Nisan fell on the Shabbos. This is the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. They asked Hillel the elder, does the Passover sacrifice override the Shabbos? He said, is there only one Passover in the year that overrides the Shabbos? There are in fact more than 300 Passovers in the year that override the Shabbos. Everyone in the temple gathered around him in protest. He said the daily Talmud sacrifice is a communal offering and it overrides the Shabbos. Therefore, likewise, the Passover sacrifice is a communal offering and it overrides the Shabbos. Moreover, I was taught by my teachers explicitly that the Passover sacrifice overrides the Shabbos. So here you have it. 1 second, we're going to... No problem. So the Passover sacrifice does override Shabbos, and Hillel the elder was the one who settled the question. Now, in order to understand what the problem was, or what was even the debate, whether it should or shouldn't override Shabbos, it comes down to whether or not Pesach offering is communal or it's personal, it's a private offering. The end of the story was that Hillel was so applauded for his halacha at the end that they turned him into the Nasi. The Nasi was the leader of the Jewish people, the head of this the prince, so you could call him. But he was the leader, and he taught the laws of Pesach, sacrifice, and from there he became the Nasi. And amazingly, his family retained the level of Nasi, him and his children, for 14 generations. And the only reason why it stopped is because after Yehuda Nasi passed away, the Romans forbade the Jewish people to appoint another Nasi in an effort to try and break Yiddishkeit. But up until that point, and likely would have continued, Hillel the elder's family dynasty kept the title of Nasi, and it all started from the story that we have in this week's Parsha: should the Korban Pesach override Shabbos or not? Let me just put this slide up here. Hillel the elder is the one who becomes a Nasi on the back of his famous answer that the Korban Pesach is a communal offering. It happens to be that Hillel was a very unlikely candidate to become the Nasi. As it says here on the slide, he was the penniless Babylonian immigrant. And he came and stepped his way up. He hadn't a penny to his name. The picture is the picture of snow-covered roof of an old shul or an old building. And why is that related to Hillel? Because famously Hillel was so poor, he came up, he couldn't even afford the door fee to get into the yeshiva. The guard would stop everyone and take a small fee to get in, and he couldn't afford it, but he was desperate to learn. He was so desperate to learn, he would climb up onto the roof of the shul and listen in through the skylight. And as the story recorded in the Gemara is, one time, it was during the winter, and they looked up to the skylight and they saw it was snow all over, but something didn't look right. There was a bit of dark color on the skylight. And they said, hold on one second, what's wrong? Why is it dark? What's on the skylight? And they went around, they went up, and they dug up the snow, only to find that Hillel the elder, who at the time was just Hillel the pauper, had been so desperate to learn, he'd been listening in through the window and hadn't noticed that it was snowing really hard, and he'd got himself buried in the snow on the roof. They quickly warmed him up, and they revived him and saved his life. And from then, they allowed him to come in without paying. A guy who was so desperate to learn, and he was a fantastical student. And he learned really well, and eventually became the top student, became a teacher, became a top teacher. And this was the Hillel who had the answer to the question. Now, what we're looking for is the significance of this halacha, which was the watershed moment in Hillel's career, so to speak, when he turned him from being just another rabbi into being the leader of the Jewish people. It's something about this halacha, how he taught it, his approach to this halacha, which demonstrated his enormous ability to lead, to teach people how to make it work. So in this particular idea that we're learning from the Parshah is that the question of Korban Pesach, of whether it's a communal offering or whether it's a private offering, is the question that we ask ourselves today when we teach our children, when we ask ourselves, what's more important to me? Is it more important for me to be a part of the community? Or is it more important for me to be able to be my individual self? And Hillel's approach, certainly the way Chassidus explains it, is that actually the best way to bring out your individualism, to be uniquely you, is to make sure that your individualism is anchored and rooted in a very healthy communal responsibility. Now you're ready to roll. In short, if I'm me for the sake of me, then that's only a little bit me. But if I'm me in order to be a productive communal member, and the only way I can do that is by making sure that I give myself and everyone around me the best me I could be, that's a very healthy individual. And that individual is the individual that Hillel saw in everything. And that's why his answer not only rang true for the question of the Korban Pesach on Shabbos, but more importantly, his approach was such an eye-opener that people said, wow, Hillel has not just got a good answer, Hillel has the life messages that we need to hear. So let's talk for a quick second whether Korban Pesach is private or communal, and we'll compare and contrast the differences, and then we'll learn the the innovation, so to speak, of Hillel. On one hand, the Korban Pesach seems very much a private affair. Why so? It is a part of the commandment to offer the Pesach sacrifice on the 14th day of the month in Nisan after midday. The offering is brought only from lambs, a male in his first years. Both men and women are obligated in this mitzvah. It's a private mitzvah, just like everyone has their own mitzvah to get themselves a pair of tefillin and wrap every day. Here you have for men and women, everyone has an obligation before Pesach, get yourself a Korban Pesach and bring it. Not only that, in the very first Pesach in history, whilst they were in Egypt, they were actually in lockdown. Literally. They were literally in full-on lockdown. It was forbidden to go out the house. They had to make sure the Korban Pesach was indoors. They painted the doorposts, sat in the house, dressed and all, but were forbidden to even step out the door. There was nothing communal about it. It was 100% a private affair. And in that angle was the reason, actually, where the Tosefta explains why the Bnei B'Seira, the leadership at the time, said, hold on one second, Korban Pesach, communal? No way, it's a private mitzvah. And private korbanos don't overwrite Shabbos. If I say to Hashem, oh, I'd like to bring you an offering, bring an offering. Just don't bring it on Shabbos. There's no way you can bring a private offering on Shabbos. And therefore, the Bnei B'Seira says, if Pesach is a private affair, it's forbidden to bring it on Shabbos. On the other hand, we learn in this week's Parshah that each household would have to bring their own Korban Pesach. But not only households had to bring it together, households were encouraged to form bubbles. And form bubbles means that you had to make sure that there was enough people to consume the entire lamb in that one night, at that one sitting. You had to make sure there were enough mouths to feed so that there wouldn't be any left over. And therefore the Torah encourages, but if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his neighbor, who is nearest to his house, should take one according to the number of people, each one according to one's ability to eat. Shall you be counted for the lamb? There was an idea of counting together, and not only counting, but bringing families together. There was a communal aspect. Even so, even more so, the Rambam writes, what happens if you have a guy who's able to eat so much meat? He can deal with the whole lamb himself. Says the Rambam, no. Go and find someone else to sit with. You might be able to do it yourself, but don't. Korban Pesach is communal. Join together with others. Equally, each bubble would send a representative to the Beis HaMikdash. We mentioned this earlier. And all the representatives would all come with their Pesach offering, and they had to bring it to the Beis HaMikdash. But even as they came to the Beis HaMikdash, there was a communal aspect in there. You didn't just walk in and say, oh, I've got a carbon to take care of. You had to join one of the 3 shifts. There were 3 shifts, and each one had to come in. You then closed the door of the Azara of the Beis HaMikdash, and everyone inside was considered one big shift. And the next shift wouldn't come in until everyone from the first shift had finished. In other words, they moved around in groupings. It was very important that the groupings were in place. And here again, we see in communal aspect where the Korban Pesach is that we do this together. So although we eat it ourselves, but we do it together. And there was quite a big emphasis of the communal aspect. And this became the debate. Which one of those 2 elements are more important? Hillel came along and said, although it's an individual carbon, but it's an individual carbon that is extremely rooted and anchored in communal. The private affairs of each family, of each person who's going to eat this, has to have its roots in the community. And it's that way around. So they heard what Hillel had to say. And once they heard what Hillel had to say, then they told him, wow, not only are we going to accept your answer, you are going to become the Nasi. What's the message? What's the lesson? What are the steps? So in order to do that, we're going to look at, there's a beautiful quote from Hillel as well. Here we go. Ethics of Our Fathers. For those of us who are still doing Pirkei Avos each Shabbos, we read it last Shabbos, but certainly the first Shabbos after Pesach is the custom for all Jewish people to learn Pirkei Avos. And in the very first chapter, Mishnah 14, we have a quote from Hillel. Hillel would also say, Im ein ani li, mi li. If I am not for myself, who is for me? However, if I am only for myself, ma'ani, what am I? Ve'im lo achshav emasai. And if not now, when? So Hillel is telling us, seems like 3 great ideas. Not for myself, and who is for me? If I'm only for myself, who am I? And if there's an opportunity to do something, do it right now. Actually, this message from Hillel is such a powerful message, and it ties also into the other beautiful message from Hillel, but love your neighbor as yourself. You don't like for yourself, don't do to others. But this message is the practical tool that we can pull out whenever we need to ask ourselves the question, individual versus communal. Should I just blend in with others, or should I stand up and be myself? And this is the calling that Hillel presents to us, and it works in 3 stages. Amazingly, Hillel's Mishnah here in Pirkei Avos follows 3 steps of the Karban Pesach, the Pesach offering message. And Hillel tells us that actually there was a reason why the first year in lockdown we brought the Pesach offering one way, and then the next year we had it in a different way, and only now do we have a 3rd lesson. And that lesson is going to be learned from the question of whether or not it should override Shabbos. So let's try and break this down. Let's read it. If I am not for myself, who is for me? Means, essentially, the Passover sacrifice is a personal one. Every individual must bring his own offering, purchased with his own money, and be part of his own group. And that's the first step. The first step we teach our children is that you cannot just hide behind the clever boys in your team, the faster boys in your football team. Whatever it is that you're doing, try and be the best you could be at it, because you are you. And although maybe right now you could be part of the group and blend in, but you have to develop the best person who you are. Why so? Because actually, that's what Hashem has in store for you. Not only because you are an individual, not only because you're part of the group, but because this is what you were born to do. That's number 1. Now we tell the child in the first year of Pesach, bring your own carbon. And it's lockdown. Lockdown meaning don't look at what someone else is doing. Don't try and compare yourself to anybody else. This is a time to develop yourself. But on the other hand, the next year, we then have to develop further. If I'm only for myself, what am I? Meaning, the sacrifice must have the properties of a communal sacrifice. You cannot just do things on your own and ignore everybody else. I have to do the best me that I can be, but also notice, how does this affect everyone else? Once I'm doing and I've developed into a person, I recognize that Hashem has tremendous expectations, but faith in me. Now I have to ask myself, what am I going to do with that? Where is this going to bring me? Is this just going to develop more me and more me? Then that's a waste. What am I? What am I that it's worth investing so much for? Instead, I have to realize that all this investment and the faith and hope that Hashem has in me is in order to be productive. How does this affect everyone else? And then there's a third thing. And that third thing is that the Karban Pesach does override Shabbos. Here it gets a little interesting. It's almost like Hillel is saying, if not now, then when? If not now, when it's Shabbos, I don't bring the Karban Pesach, what would have been left? How would it have worked? The Pesach offering overrides Shabbos tells us that when something is important to be done, and it's the necessary thing to be done, then even though it's Shabbos, when it's the right halacha, it has to be done nonetheless, and has to be done this way. So here we have the 3 steps. If I'm not for myself, as me, I have to be the person I was born to be. Not to be the person I was born as, but the person I was born to be. So although I might feel like incapable, but if this as I was born to be, I have to live up to that, stretch myself, develop myself, and learn to develop, learn to become bigger. Lesson number 1. And at the same time, if I'm owning for myself, what am I? My identity is also defined by the people I belong to. The great, tremendous gifts that I have that I'm going to develop and work on are here for me and on behalf of the people I belong to. And therefore identify myself as a loner, as a unique individual, and just me, I've missed the boat. But instead, I'm able to stretch it and be able to see that who is the real me? A contributing community member. What am I contributing? Myself, my own talents, my own uniqueness. But I'm contributing that to where I'm rooted. That's number 2. If not now, then when? The shared goal of the community takes precedence. There are times when, even though it's Shabbos, the communal offering, communal aspect rises to the forefront. Interestingly, when we ask ourselves, which one of the personal elements that I have most define me? The way I dress, the way I eat, where I live, what hobbies I have, or the community I'm part of, the people I belong to, the communal responsibilities that I have. When you boil it down, what is the most important thing? Of course, when we ask in casual conversation, who am I? Well, you'll find out what sort of job I have. You'll find out, I don't know, what I like doing, where I live, who I hang out with. But when I ask myself, what's really important to me? What really defines the core of who I am? What's really who I am is what I believe in, what I feel for strongly, even stronger than my hobbies, because hobbies do change, and where I live do change, and all the other things do change. But the core of who I am is the community I'm part of. And not just community in its basic sense, but the community in its ideal sense, where I belong to a nationality, a race, a faith, a connection to Hashem that is in a particular frame of things. And Hillel teaches us that actually you cannot sacrifice one for the other. You can't sacrifice the individual on behalf of the community, but equally the individual has to know you can't sacrifice community for the sake of my own individuality and my uniqueness. And they have to complement each other. So, some beautiful quotes from the Torah, how Hashem says, this are the 3 steps, part of the whole, community, contributing to the community. But more importantly, I become a strong individual through being part of the community. The best me is the me that has a sense of belonging, and now I can really be the real self. When Hillel taught this to the people, they recognized the depth of it, and they said, we need to appreciate this. This is a lesson from the Parshah. But here we find that Hashem works with us in exactly the same way. Hashem treasures each one of us as a part of the whole, and Hashem treasures each one of us as our individual as well. One quote from Yirmiyah talks about Hashem bringing Mashiach and collecting all of us as everyone together. Great company shall they return here. Kahal Gadol Yeshuveina. Everybody will be brought back together. And then there's another quote from Yeshaya also talking about the same idea. Hashem's going to bring us all back. V'atem tegluktu le'echad echad, hand in hand, one by one. Every individual will be brought back by Hashem. Because although, of course, Hashem appreciates each one of us as a part of the massive whole of the Jewish people, but more specifically, a community is a collection of individuals. But that collection of individuals cares about the community. And that sort of balance is enormous. Let's just put that quote on from Rabbi Sachs. I once had the opportunity to ask the Catholic writer Paul Johnson what had struck him most about Judaism during the long period he spent researching for his master the history of the Jews. He replied in roughly these words: there have been in the course of history societies that emphasize the individual, like the secular West today. And there have been others that place weight on the collective, communist Russia or China, for example. Maybe this explains why we care so much about individual. We live in a society that pushes that. So here Rabbi Sachs writes, Judaism, he continued, was the most successful example he knew of that managed the delicate balance between both giving equal weight to individual and collective responsibilities. Judaism was a religion of strong individuals and strong communities. This, he said, was very rare and difficult and constituted as one of our greatest achievements. And Rabbi Sachs says, it shows eyes and subtle observation without knowing it. He had in effect paraphrased Hillel's euphemism: if I am not for myself, who will be individual responsibility? But if I am only for myself, what am I? Collective responsibility. And this sort of approach, where a person is able to remind myself which one I need to emphasize more. This is a key to being able to not only be comfortable with myself, but also to find within myself the ability to relate to and help out others. Almost like a rowing boat. You don't have a forward go pedal. You have a right oar and a left oar. Sometimes we need a little bit more individual responsibility. Sometimes we need to emphasize a bit more collective responsibility. But each one complements and brings out the best of the other. And this, I think, is a very beautiful idea from this week's Parsha, in how we learn that the Karban Pesach was brought even on Shabbos from the word b'mayadoi, in its appointed time. And why is it brought in Shabbos? Because although it's got tremendous individual aspects to it, it's rooted in communal. And this became the lesson which turned Hillel from the pauper Babylonian immigrant into becoming the Jewish leader for 14 generations. And he was the last, his family was the last of the Jewish Nesiim in its time. So we've learned something. I hope it's practical for you as it is for me. And Hashem should bench us with a blessed week, a successful week. And as we said, today's the Yimei Tashlumin, the days of making up anything that we might have missed out from Shavuos. And of course, if anyone's looking for entertainment, 5:45 this evening, 5:45 is thechidon.com. It's the international award ceremony and celebration for the children who learned, thousands of children actually, learned around the world the Sefer HaMitzvos. I want to wish everyone a wonderful week. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Be'ezras Hashem.
Thank you very much.
Birkat Kohanim, absolutely. It was last week's Sedra. May you all have all the brachas you need and much more.
Yes, I've got a question.
Please.
So when we talk about communal and then your personal, so does that mean so sometimes because your personality can be different, you might not agree with what the community do? So what are you saying? Are you saying that the person has to adapt or change his personal ways in order to put the priorities the community?
Not so much. What we were saying is not so much that we have to change what we do because the community does it a certain way. What we are saying is that our individuality should be directed towards and guided by a communal aspect. So let's just say practically, someone has a personal need or a personal talent. They could say, "Oh, I don't care what everyone else needs. I'm just going to pursue myself." As a Yiddish person, I feel like a responsibility to the community should direct where I'm going to put my emphasis. Either I'll find time to give back to the community, or I'll direct my talents to the community. And sometimes, yes, the community is going to come first, even if it's at the cost of my own personal pursuit. But not just because everyone wears a white shirt, therefore I have to wear a white shirt. But whenever the community has a need, that need has to be taken seriously. Why? Even though it's not my personal need, but because that's what a communal need is, I take my aspect of the community as the reason why my individuality has to thrive. That's why I have to make sure that I'm good, because I'm part of the community. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Shkoyach.
Blessed week, Yasha. It's good to see you. I don't see you, but at least I hear you.
Yes. Bezat Hashem.
Be gebenched.
Kol Tov.
Kol Tov, Hatzlacha, Yom Tov.
Yom Tov.